Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and maybe other species. FSUFO here, Forbidden Science UFO, with our host Christopher Stiles, who's slightly under the weather today, but is going to still thrill us with some really interesting tales. We're going to do a minority report. These are a few of my favorite things. It's not mine, it's Chris's favorite things. And I'm going to act as his foil.
Well,
I won't foil you necessarily.
No, and hopefully I'm not the sacrificial lamb, but this is sometimes, you can't help but think that this is what happens, people, when a guest cancels or you can't find one. And then you get a few emails and people say, didn't I once hear you? And they want me to explain myself further. So this is a chance to do that while I'm under the weather. And, I'm here so Michael can pick my brains. And
well, I'll
I don't
save you
know.
some grief, Chris. We got an itinerary for this show. Comes from Chris's world's poorest cheat notes, he calls it. So we're going to talk about a few of his favorite things. And these are kind of like a minority. This is like a minority report because these are I've been listening to podcasts that I've listened to. Some of these subjects that we're going to talk about aren't really brought up all that often. So I'm excited about this. I love picking your brain. So let's start with we're up here in Canada, and of course in Canada we have the Aboriginals of the North, which formerly called the Eskimos, and number one on the of your favorite things, I will just call the Inukshuk theory, and I'll let you go with that. What the heck is it, an Inukshuk theory?
Well, the ufological aspect of it is all mine in this case. This is an original idea. I don't get many that I can say there for our viewing public of people that have not been up north or are not familiar with Canada and our natives and those of the far north. What you're seeing there is it's a slightly unusual Inukshuk, but it gets the idea across. Often you see rocks like that just stacked up that are chosen in something not quite random. And when they're put together, they imply a man, a human, that form, a trunk,
They're
appendages,
lovely
a
to
head.
see, and people,
They are.
often leave them on the beaches. I see them in Prince Edward Island in Nova Scotia and
Right.
all over the world. I've seen them.
And what led to this me grabbing this as a title for this, some say wiggy idea, some say unnecessary, but it's an idea I cling to and one I believe I came up with on my own, not inspired by others, other than the name and the appearance of the Inukshuk. And there was a great little Canadian historical vignette that used to play on television here as a time filler, for a lack of ads or, a shortened program. And I believe it was set in Ungava Bay, which is an interesting place. First of all, Ungava Bay, which is kind of a cool semicircle, if you look on the map cut out of Quebec, that empties into Hudson Bay, is probably the rim of an impact crater, and that little section of the bay is where you can discern it's that sliver of a circular crater, a rather large impact in our Earth's past. And it shows, I think it was set in 1903 in this big net, and it shows an RCMP officer with an injured leg and a crutch, and a young native boy helping him get up and that. And he's watching a couple of elders, I believe, and a woman, put together some Inukshuk on the beach. And the RCMP officer asks, like, what are they? What do they mean? And the boy answers, and when I first saw this, it had a great impact on me. He says, now the people will know we were here. If you're in a land as sparse and unpopulated as that, that's a useful piece of information. Because you might have wandered for days and not see anybody and wonder if anybody was ever there. Is there any reason to go on? I suppose theoretically it could have saved a life or kept somebody going or whatever. But the point is, it struck me and it struck a chord within me. But here's what I was thinking at the time. Before that, little historic big net, that commercial for Canadian Heritage Moments came on television. I can't remember, probably the CBC. It I was mulling over what could certain classes of UFO sightings be, because at some point in the day it always enters my mind in a dull moment between more exciting moments, whatever. And one of the things I've often grappled with over the years, and I think somebody'd asked me a question in an email, is what do I think the purpose is of orbs and what they called, and I like this term, soft UFOs.
Mm-hmm.
And a great example of a soft UFO would be like these diaphanous lights that are just kind of a cloud of light that will follow aircraft or whatever, such as in the John Breen sighting in Newfoundland in the mid 70s,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But they seem to indicate an intelligence or, at least sentience, in that they play this cat and mouse thing. There's a curiosity, right?
Mm-hmm.
But again, back to the Inukshuk. Here's the idea. I looked at that and I thought, well, what could these things be? And many researchers have said, well, obviously, this is not the mothership. This is not even a sport model. You know what most people call a little zippy flying saucer or
Mm-hmm.
egg shaped
That came
craft that
from
might
Bob
take
Lazar, the sport model. Yeah.
an occupant thing. Yeah, I'm not sure he was the first. He might have been. We'll give Bob that. But so, what are these little craft? What are these lights? What are the orbs? Some of which I've seen myself in the past. Well, there were many of them here. They're often orange. They often lack a lot of detail, but sometimes they will have a structure to them. So, what could they be? And what's often suggested by many ufologists is, okay, it's not a craft as such. Perhaps it's a probe. Well, that could
Mm-hmm.
make a lot of sense. We send
Mm-hmm.
them to Mars. They're often smallish. A higher tech society, a higher tech civilization, they could very much be smaller still, more compact, have less physical substance to them. And it
Mm-hmm.
would be quite useful. And many people have suggested this. There's nothing fresh about that. But here's what else I thought. And in itself, I wouldn't be the person to suggest this, but very few have thought, and some have, that perhaps what these are not craft, not a probe, but simply a message in themselves. Now, the message could be like, yes, so this light, this ball, this whatever, could be this cloud, could be a message. It could be like a holograph, but it could be something physical too. But that's not the point. The point is, what kind of message could it deliver? Because I've never seen a case other than, unless you want to look to scripture or something, the burning bush to Moses or something. Um, there doesn't seem to be a structured message, a lesson as such. There's no moral tale to it. So, what could it say? And it kind of dawned on me when I saw the Inukshuk Big Net on television, because I looked at that and I thought, now the people will know we were here. But in the case of
Now the
a
people will
sighting
know
of an orb,
we were here. Yeah.
we are here. Now the people will know we are here. It would be in terms of, the UFO meaning of it, right?
Right.
But it
Right.
could mean more than that, quite simply. Think of this, Michael. You have a sighting. Let's take one that we're some of our audience, and certainly you and I are familiar with, and people that have read about the Shag Harbour incident in one of my books, or seen some of the documentary treatments, including yours on television.
Mm-hmm.
You take a case like the Smith brothers case, where they saw these little orange lights over the highway that lit up 3 years after the Shag Harbour incident blocked the path of their vehicle.
Lawrence
On
Smith.
old highway number 3. Yes, Lawrence and Eugene Smith, a couple of Shag Harbour fishermen. One
Mm-hmm.
evening in November of 1970, 3 years after the Shag Harbour incident, were driving home
Mm-hmm.
after visiting the RCMP to report a missing daughter, not thinking of
Mm-hmm.
UFOs,
That's right.
and a group of 7 little lights about 18 inches across an orange pier seemed to manifest out of nowhere on the highway in front of them.
Mm-hmm.
It's foggy out. They're the only car there. Initially, they think a tractor trailer is jackknifed on the highway and they're looking at the running lights.
Mm-hmm.
They hit the brakes, their car stops, and they stare at this, and they believe it lasts for about 30 seconds. Although later the Mounties suspect there may have been 10 minutes missing time. But here's the cool part. They see these little orange lights 18 inches in diameter, and the estimates and they were interviewed separately, are very consistent. And the pattern that they show, you could say looks a little like the Big Dipper, but in fact, it looks a little more like the constellation Lyra. And while they watch this, there's an interesting feature. One of the lights extinguishes or dims and comes back on a couple of times. Okay.
I don't remember
So,
that, but
what
that's
could that mean? Hmm?
I don't remember you ever saying that, but that
Yeah,
incident.
it's actually written into the illustration and the little notes that Constable Ralph Keeping wrote beneath the illustrations.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a line drawn, indicating which one of the lights went out and come on.
Mm-hmm.
So, what could the message be in this case? If you were to show it, in the past, other visitations, other encounters, let's look at a famous one like Betty Hill's, where she was supposedly shown the star map, later reconstructed by what is it, the Marjorie Fish, the astronomer, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she believes that it showed that their point of origin was Zeta Reticuli 1 or 2 there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if that was the case, could the Smith Brothers sighting show an
Oh man.
arrangement of stars as it would be seen from the Earth? And why would one of them go out and come on? Could that be the point of origin?
But why would they show that the two fishermen on a back road in southwest Nova Scotia?
Why do you build an Inukshuk?
Hmm.
Now the people know we were here.
Yeah, it's non-discriminatory. It's a symbol for
I'll take
everybody.
it a step further than that. It's not discriminatory and it's not damaging in any way, but it tells you something. It tells you there's something there. You're in the midst of something.
Mm-hmm. But why wouldn't that be transmitted to the entire population of southwest Nova Scotia instead of two fishermen? That's what I don't get. The,
Well, sometimes there are larger audiences for these
like for
displays.
example, Fatima.
Fatima, excellent, Michael. You're a quick study. I'm telling you, Fatima, an excellent example. You know what I love? Actually, let me just finish this up, and I'll tell you what I love about Fatima.
Mm-hmm.
I would have probably said 2018, my orb sighting with about 60 other people on the beach, but Fatima, far better example. And I'll tell you soon why it is so much better. But let's just go back to those two fishermen. And it's not just two fishermen, it happens 20 miles away to a military corporal leaving the base with his girlfriend and her mother, who all witness it at the gates of the base at Canadian Forces Station Barrington at Backrow.
Mm-hmm.
Timothy Nielsen, who stays all night
Mm-hmm.
to be debriefed by his commanding officer over it, very
Mm-hmm.
shook up and disturbed, as are the two Smith brothers. So yeah, why just for them? Well, I don't know, but they were there, others were there. We'll get to Fathom in a second, but let's just say that's the message for whatever reason. It conveys no more and no less than the Inukshuk. It doesn't tell you a
Mm-hmm.
whole lot, but it
Mm-hmm.
tells you something was here, something living, something you would not expect,
Mm-hmm.
in the middle of nowhere, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Arguably, if you want to try to interpret the message further, if it can be, and that could be an error, um, why would it show a set of lights that could represent a set of stars as they would appear from the surface of the Earth in that time frame? And when you
Mm-hmm.
look at it, that could be it. And why would one wink of, well, maybe that's their point of origin, which
Mm-hmm.
strangely enough would have been Lyra,
Mm-hmm.
like the movie Contact, strangely.
So, what do you mean
However,
Vega in Lyra, the big bright star?
Vega, yeah, in Lyra. Anyway, here's the thing. Maybe it was that, maybe it's less than that, but it certainly got everybody's attention. So it wasn't a complete failure like the Inukshuk. It was
Mm-hmm.
remembered, it stood out,
Right.
right?
That's true. We did go
And in
beyond the
fact,
two
there was
fishermen.
an extremely strong emotional impact.
Mm-hmm.
But I,
Mm-hmm.
I, I like where you took this. I like where you took this. So let's jump to
That's my job,
Fatima.
Chris.
Yeah, well, you're on. You're a quick study tonight. Here's what I like about Fatima. We could go on and we could blow the hour totally on that, and we won't and we shouldn't. But
No,
here's
because
the
we got
key
to move
thing
on.
about Fatima. Here's the
Hmm.
great thing about the message there that I love so much, that shows that for a message to work, you think about it before you start crossing species or other intelligent races. Look at the trouble we had just deciphering hieroglyphics
Hmm.
and the amount of years it took before we got the breakthroughs there, right?
Hmm.
Not an easy thing. So, any message you leave that involves language, that involves text, that involves the need for interpretation, it's probably going to be lost, confused, mistaken, never
Hmm.
translated, etc. Right?
Hmm.
So, when all you know is that there's somebody there potentially intelligent to receive it, you go to the most universal way possible, just like the message that was put on the side of Voyager, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
There's a good chance it could be understood.
Well,
And
that's an Inukshuk, basically.
that's right. It's all that. But I picked the Inukshuk because the message is so pure and so basic, but it serves the same purpose, right? Now the
Hmm.
people know we were here, but just bring it to the present that we are here.
All right,
Okay.
I'm gonna take this. I know we were going to talk about Fatima, but we got to move on. So, but I'm going to put a twist on
Well, let me
this with
say
my
one
film.
thing about Fatima. You know what the
Okay, go
real
ahead.
power of Fatima is? I got to
What?
say it because it's beautiful. And I'm glad you brought it's this simply that, as you know, there were crowds of in the tens of thousands there that day watching the
Fifty
miracle
thousand on the big day. Yeah.
on the big day. On what was it, the ninth visitation, was it? You're the Catholic here.
Yes. Yeah.
Less fallen than
When the sun
myself
started spinning around in the sky,
dancing in the
and
sky. Okay,
yeah.
here's the thing. The most impressive thing about the whole thing is those who saw, who witnessed the miracle, those who were cured, those who, whatever that day, that were part of this very special event. The line between those who seen and those who did not experience it did not fall between believer and non believer, faithful and non
That's
faithful.
right, because it
That's
was
right.
seen from the nearest town by onlookers who actually watched it occur.
But people who were there, some of these Portuguese communist soldiers who were there to enforce order, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And who were to that point in life, uh, not amongst the faithful, witnessed it.
Right. That's right. It
And
wasn't a
some of the
matter of
faithful,
faith. It wasn't a
some of
matter
the
of faith.
faithful did not, right? And
Or
to
they saw
me,
different things.
or they saw different things. And to me, that is the beauty and what that tells us, because that's a large pool of people. And I'll leave it at that. There's a lot we could talk,
That's good.
but to me, that's
That's
a
good.
powerful insight from
When
a
will
powerful
we
message.
will revisit this? That's hard to say. We will revisit. We will revisit this subject
It's hard for
and
hard for
go
you to
further
say.
in depth. But I want to just using your cheat notes here, which I'm actually not looking at because I can actually
They won't help
keep
much.
a little bit of a memory going. Um, so we're talking about. Okay, well that's done. What about the fact that it's possible that we have a hidden reality that's lived among us? All right, a
Yeah,
biosphere, a
hidden
hidden
reality.
biosphere.
Okay, well here's where East meets West and scientist meets non-scientist and ufologist meets the confused here. Um, what you're kind of referring to? There's actually kind of a revolution of thought going on now in the field of biology that I think has implications for ufology right now, right here, right
Hmm.
now. And
Hmm.
it's simply this, that you know there's been some major revolutions, and one of those revolutions is simply better understanding and categorizing the domains of life. Biology recognizes and works on a three domain system. And it's something that when I was in high school would have made little to no sense to most people to try to
Okay,
teach,
what are the
right?
three domains?
The
What are
three
the three
domains
domains?
currently that you would categorize there could move all known life on planet Earth into are these. The first is bacteria. Okay. Single celled. We've all heard of them. They've been around forever. That's
Hmm.
one third of everything that's alive.
Hmm.
The other third, archaea. Now, archaea, when I was in high school, was simply considered weird bacteria. But now it's a whole domain of life in itself. And everything else that we think of as life and that you see every day, from mankind to plants to animals to fungi to anything multicellular, fish, mammals, warthogs, groundhogs, whatever, snakes.
Platypi.
Okay. These are eukaryotes.
Okay,
Now,
but
what does
just go back to the previous one, the eukaryotes. But give us an example of the archaea. What is it you call it? The
archaea?
archaea. What's
Archaea,
it? One or two examples of archaea?
this is a little simplified, but archaea is like, it tends to be extremophiles. These are things that might appear, single celled like bacteria, right? But
Mm-hmm.
they often, many of the divisions of them, they are found in extreme environments, like the hypothermal vents down on the ocean
Okay.
floor, or in extremely acidic pools, even in
Or
oil,
on the
underground oil.
exterior wall of, yeah, or in the exterior of the International Space Station.
Yeah, and possibly yes. And the other thing that's really unusual in these three domains of life, eukaryotes, these things that we typically see and recognize as life instantly without a biologist at hand, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Eukaryotes, including humans, are more closely related to archaea, which is the oldest of these, than they are to bacteria, which is so universal in that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the designation between them has all got to do with cellular function, how things work. Like in archaea, the cells have no nucleus. Well, in all eukaryotes, there is a nucleus and it has a cell membrane.
Mm-hmm.
In bacteria, it tends to have, it's all based on function. It's not on appearance,
Mm-hmm.
okay, as things were traditionally seen. So it's a very revolutionary concept. It came out about around 1990. Carl Woese and some of his colleagues were the early promoters of it. It was very quickly accepted, and some people now are trying to reorganize it into a simple two-domain system. But anyway, the early idea of the tree of life and the tree of life thing is extremely, there you have it. There
Mm-hmm.
you have it. Now,
Wow,
here's
what a
the other thing.
producer! Holy moly!
Isn't he good?
Yeah,
I love that guy. I'd like to
yeah,
meet
I
him
do too.
someday. Now,
Yeah.
you notice how it all joins up. The implication here below that, see the straight line at the bottom,
Mm-hmm.
is that at some point in the past, there's a common
Getting
ancestor.
attacked by his archaea here. Hold on a second. Yep.
Yeah. That at some point there's a common ancestor. But that is even deceiving now. And the guy who first reorganized the domains in this, Carl Woese and his colleagues, right?
Mm-hmm.
What he points out now is that this is deceptive and it's not really like a tree of life, because at the point of the last, unknown common ancestor to all life there, right,
Mm-hmm.
is
Mm-hmm.
there was a lot of horizontal transfer of genes. Okay.
Between the three.
Well, no, when there was just one, when there was a last
Oh.
known common ancestor from there going back, there was all kinds of horizontal transfer. And what do I mean by that? Is that genetic material, pieces of genetic material, when life appeared, would have moved back and forth, wasn't part of the normal evolutionary process, and probably represents other life strategies that didn't use DNA. There was probably an earlier RNA world, ribose nucleic acid,
Pre
for
DNA
example.
world.
This is not 100% certain, but it's largely accepted by a lot of researchers, and they are still looking for evidence of this, right?
This is fascinating,
That would
Chris.
tie it down. Well, it is, and we're going to lead into something more closely related to UFOs in a second. But the point is, we're not in the realm of ufology. We're talking about biology, and this is a big revolution at the moment going on. This understanding, and like so much in science, the more we learn, we find the more we don't understand, unfortunately. But with all
Mm-hmm.
this sideways gene transfer, before the last known common ancestor, the possibility exists that RNA could have been overtaken by DNA, of course, and obviously DNA is the scheme now, right? But
Mm-hmm.
there were other possibilities even. Remember, because if you go far enough back, the other thing that seems to be happening now is it's very doubtful. We're running out of time for abiogenesis to happen. and that's when life appears from non-living things
I think
onto
that
Earth.
every day. What's abiogenesis?
Abiogenesis is when non-living things, probably what you would call organic, which doesn't mean life, but simply carbon-based structures,
Like crystals.
proteins, etc.
Okay, yeah,
Earlier,
complex
yes,
compounds.
complex, carbon compounds came together and at some point became a living thing. This still seems to be extremely, you know, and when we look at how far back fossils go, and it's felt that, of course, this could not begin on Earth before the moon is blasted out of us and, the Earth cools down and solidifies a bit again. And when you're going back to the earliest fossils, there's not a whole lot of time left now between the formation of the moon and, which would have pretty much stopped everything in its tracks had it just started here, right? So it's starting to look more than likely that at least panspermia was part of it. And that's the concept, of course, that living things or near living things rain down upon the Earth from comets or whatever, distributed through interstellar space, right?
Panspermia, yeah.
So a lot of this transfer could have occurred between, what we normally would recognize as living things and current. There we go. There's Abby. Now, look at this. There's a great illustration. Look at the question marks. Look at this.
Question marks.
That
What is
tells
that?
you they're in trouble, right? And,
Right.
and you see the circular thing there? You know what that kind of represents, or something similar, I'm sure they're getting around. One of the things we've discovered recently is that when we've all heard of viruses, right? But there's actually simpler pathogens around now called, and they've always been here and probably predate viruses, called viroids.
Yeah, right. Mm.
Viroids, some of the simplest ones, get this, are only like 300 and something molecules. There ain't a lot
Wow,
there.
that's not much.
But no, and like a virus, they need to infect a living thing to do it.
Hmm.
Interestingly, viroids, which must have existed getting again really near that early point, when the earth would have been just too nasty for any hope of life, whether it
Hmm.
was started here or brought here. You're
Hmm.
getting really back to that point. I forget what they call that period of time. It sounds something like hell, I think. But um,
Hmm.
when you look at those things, the implication is strong. The other thing is you see that, like, viroids today and throughout time only infect plants and not animals. So it implies
Interesting.
very early on. But they are, once in a host, they can do things that living things do. It's depends on definition whether they're alive or not. But you can see it, even though we've learned all these great things, it's opened up more questions in this, right?
Oh,
And I
oh,
think it
yeah.
would be hard to ignore the fact that, in fact, there was probably an earlier RNA world. There was
Hmm.
probably other strategies we're unaware of. There was
Hmm.
probably abiogenesis and panspermia and everything going on, and all this transfer. The
Hmm.
picture's a lot more complex, and it's going to be interesting as time goes on. So, what's that got
Wow.
to do with UFOs? Here's the
Right.
thing: life is very hard to recognize, and it's probably around us in ways we don't recognize whatsoever. For more than 100 years, some biologists have said that things like desert varnish may be a form of life. That's a kind of a weird glaze you get on rocks in the desert. Clay, clay infused with certain chemicals might be a
A
form of
form of life.
life. Yes. Um, but this brings us back to something else that now we'll look at. There were some early people that were significant in ufology, and their ideas have fallen by the wayside. Notable amongst them would be Trevor Constable. He was a New Zealander who wrote a number of books. He was quite popular, fairly successful in his day. And he thought that a lot of these orbs and lights, and when you couldn't see them, he thought they were still here. And as he sometimes would say, they had a tendency to exist.
Hmm.
And there was evidence that they were around when we couldn't see them. And he didn't know why we could see them and not see them, but he had a number of theories for different things. And he used to try to photograph them with scientific ultraviolet film. And he had some success with this. And his books were, now, some of these pictures to me were just probably the process gone wrong, or being affected by other things. But some of these were pretty consistent and looked a lot like the orb things, and they could be anything from 18 inches, like the Smith brothers, to half a mile across. And his ideas became pretty consistent, and his books were read, and some of these were worked into things like that great I don't have a copy of anymore, UFO analysis flowchart created by Wilbert Smith. That you could look at sightings and the details and decide what they're coming from. And
Oh,
Smith
there's a
was,
show. We got to. I'm
yeah,
sorry to interrupt you, but we got to do a show about Wilbur.
yeah, yeah, we should. And but Constable's ideas impressed him, and I do know for a fact now in this slow headway, and this is another short teaser, and I'm not going to answer any questions about this. You know that right now I'm having a real deep re-examination of the Shelburne story that has been wrapped up for so long into the Shag Harbor incident. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that the Shelburne story has said that you don't often hear is that some of these divers and some of the naval personnel told me that people from the Defense Research Board used to show up with that flow chart and look at it after they would ask for story details from the divers or people that had witnessed a UFO incident on a Navy vessel. So, it had that kind of traction, right? And I can
Mm-hmm.
remember uh, shipmates of my father when he was on active service coming back and saying, "Oh, yeah, we know there's such a thing, and we believe they live about 50 miles up, and they only come down if they're injured or curious or something happens to them or upsets them." And the Navy seemed to have, the Royal Canadian Navy seemed to have this belief amongst certain staffers and researchers that high intensity radar, when they came near these, is partially what made them visible and sometimes aggressive.
Hmm.
And this has all gone by the wayside. The field has largely abandoned this, and I think it should not have.
So we're
Because
talking about critters here now.
critters, that's right. And great you use that word, because there was, who I believe it was John Brent Musgrave, got a grant from the Canada Council. And when he produced his work about what he'd found about all this, he used to use the word critters, and it brought public scandal. That Canada's tax dollars are being used to look at UFOs and
Frivolous
aliens and
ways. Yeah. Yeah.
critters, right? But these people were quite serious, and I think some of this work. Now, these opinions, these back in the day were often overshadowed. This is before the internet, but still, you were much more likely to be invited with Johnny Carson on the Tonight Show if you were either a serious UFO researcher, or better yet, you'd been abducted by aliens and you wrote a book and it was a bestseller. If you come on and done a lot of scientific research and filming and were liaising with the Canadian Navy and thought you had an insight into sky creatures that could appear and disappear and were living amongst us but typically invisible, um, no, that wasn't the show grabber you'd hope it would be. So,
Mm.
as these people passed on and nobody took up that torch, these ideas fell into disfavor. And I think it was,
Mm-hmm.
I think we're the lesser for it. Because, at the heart of it, I've often been described, others have, and I've certainly, when I've had to supply a bio, said, look, I have a blended view of this phenomena. At some point, there's a nuts and bolts reality and a strong psychic component. But perhaps more importantly, I believe that the unknown cases, the great cases, any good sighting out there that our audience has had that would hold up to closer scrutiny, I think those unknown cases, quite simply, well, what can you say? They're help me, Michael.
Oh well, I'm going to help you because I think I think that you've emptied your magazine on this one, at least for now. So we're going to move
Well,
on to the next topic. Unless you got a parting word on this one, we're 35 minutes into the show. We typically do an hour to an hour and five. We got three more topics on the list here. I
well,
this one keeps on. Okay, you got something to say?
I just think that you know it hasn't been ignored, but somewhere between my little deep dive into the revolution in biology right now, it's time to bring this stuff back. You know, um,
You mean the
I don't know.
ETH is overplayed and the constant go to in the
I think it's all
community, and
viable. Like I say, I believe that the unknowns have multiple causes. There's my
hmm
point, right? And I think the ETH is still viable and on the table. I'm not about to give it up. I know occasionally some European or French friend of mine will tell me, God, North America, last bastion of the ETH, but I'm not letting it go yet. I'm not going
hmm
to let it
hmm
go. I hang on to the ETH. But at the same time, I believe there could be a hidden biosphere, but not only a hidden biosphere, but a hidden sort of biosphere that could even be extra dimensional.
yeah,
Hence the tendency to exist and tendency to not exist and the
which
interference,
could
right?
also be critters.
Which could also be, well, that's right, sky creatures, he called them critters, good as name as any. And you know what? We haven't heard the last of them. I'm not going to let it die out.
All
Take us
right.
to the next topic
What about the
before I get tongue tied again.
what about the people who are tasked? Where in society we have these so-called experts, right? And the government has experts in
There's no
departments, and
experts.
well, I mean, what? How does the
Some of them
intelligence
dress as
community?
experts. They're paid as experts. The intelligence community. Okay,
How do they sort
mili-
it out?
okay. First of all, the intelligence community. I mean, when you're talking military intelligence, it's a cheap shot. But look, it's an oxymoron.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure those words really go together. Some are paid handsomely for it. Some risk lives for it. I don't want to totally. But look, let me look at this. I'll tell you what I've learned from it. The whole intelligence thing to me is always been a dog's breakfast, as I call it.
hmm
And let me give you some. You might remember when we were doing one of your documentaries. Uh, I forget who we had as a guest at the time, but one of the things that came up was the Sarbacher statement. About
Oh,
you
Palmiro
know
Campagna.
yeah. But anyway, the point is not that you were getting his input because there's been this claim that Sarbacher, who was one of the fathers of the H bomb, of
hmm
thermonuclear weapons, claimed that he was invited to see crash saucers and dead aliens, but he was too busy. Okay. Now, he wasn't part of the intelligence community, but the intelligence community. But I had a great deal of problem with that claim and story. And you know that we could go into some real comedic things that come out. But I wrestled with that for a long time because, the people that had related it, you know, in one way it was believable, but come on, come on. Would you turn down that invite?
No, probably not.
Yeah. It would
No.
might take a nuclear physicist, but I still wrestle with that. But here's the thing about the intelligence community. And there's a lot of talk about this now because when you look at the release from, uh, the Pentagon, right?
hmm Recently.
What does that mean? Well, first of all, you talk about the intelligence community, you're talking apples and oranges because if you're talking U.S. intelligence, you're talking Canadian intelligence or British or Soviet or current Russian, boy, you're talking whole different animals here. And here's the
hmm
difference. And in some way, it's kind of like how the RCMP is unique. You look at Canadian history, right? The intelligence community here, military intelligence is mostly through the Defense Research Board, which currently is known as what is it? It's not DREA. They've moved on from that now. Anyway, you can't keep up with the updates
Yeah.
anyway. But it has a long history, and it was really organized through the necessity and during World War II, right? But the thing is, in Canada, it's very centralized. The DRB, does the research. They'll come and they'll approach the Navy or the Air Force or whatever with a need, and they will
hmm
help them develop it and coordinate it, right? But it's one central agency
They're
in the
carrying the
United
ball.
States. That's right. So in the United States, the Air Force has its own intelligence. The Navy has its own intelligence. And you think about it right now, in the past, we used to hear, and many of the Golden Age UFO books used to go on about the Air Force and their secrecy and the games they played and the deceptions and the evasion. And it was true, right? But
Mhm.
look right now what's going on. I've heard very little from the Air Force. You look at the release of the Pentagon and the people you're talking to, it's all Navy, isn't it? Suddenly
Mhm.
the Navy has a lot to say. And
Mhm.
I don't think
Mhm.
anybody be saying anything unless there hadn't been the leak that there had been
Mhm.
to the Stars Group and to Lou Elizondo, right?
Are you
And
talking
well,
about the attack videos, etc.?
that's right. The Tic Tac videos and the orb videos, the cube, the sphere inside the cube video scene. Yeah, more oftenly the media seems to be in love with the Tic Tac. I actually like the other ones better because you have radar confirmation of all of them there, right?
Mhm.
The upgraded F-16s in 2014 were able to track these to destination or disappearance, whereas the
Mhm.
Tic Tac ones rarely painted anything.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, but the point
But they
is,
did have that spectacular video of it crashing into the ocean.
yes, yeah, and it's impressive and it's meaningful. It's good stuff, and we wouldn't be talking about it, and nobody be talking about it other than as told to by Commander X, if there had not
Mhm.
been the leak, and if the public and the pilots had not talked to the New York Times, etc.
Mhm.
But that's significant. But here's my point: is you look at the intelligence thing. Um, and how often in the past has the Navy and the Air Force said, you know what, the Air Force got all the secrets and the Air Force calls the Navy? Down in the States, it's always a pissing match between these intelligence agencies, and things abound, that it's like the police forces. Here in
Mhm.
Canada,
Mhm.
you have one coordinated thing. However, what I've discovered is within that, there is at least one significant rogue element that's been there since World War II, and that's the
Mhm.
part that controls developments and monitoring of the Atlantic Ocean and weapon systems. And
Mhm. Mhm.
ironically, they state one of their key functions is, I love this, knowledge management, and they've done a pretty good job because I'm working on a new work, and I hope to go public with it, whether the book's done or not, probably by the end of the summer, but hopefully the book too, showing just how they managed to pull this off. And there's a lot of dirty tricks, but sometimes luck just falls into their hand. One of the things that, and you can understand this, where after World War II, the intelligence agencies of the Allies, and very specifically the US, Canada, and Britain, had to work together. We share a common border. The U.S. did so much to help Britain. The U.S. And Britain did a lot to help the U.S. with helping them set up the CIA and other agencies, the Office of Overseas, et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm.
Churchill and Truman, and you know,
Mhm.
they were bound in. The trouble was when these things were created, they did not get along. And, a framework would be set up. And one of the funny things I found in what I've been digging through is that in Canada, uh, we were supposed to receive a liaison officer from the head of defense intelligence in the U.S., so we could set up sharing of information and that. Through the war and through the Cold War, that position was never filled because they figured we didn't have anything. And I think the first time that happened was with the development of the bear trap,
Mhm.
which is that winch system
The
for bringing
helicopter
down.
retrieval system on the
That's
ships.
right. Yeah. But for all those years in between, and which I know where we were encountering USOs under the water with American forces in tow, we never shared any of that information, and vice
with
versa.
with
Yeah.
the United
And
States.
that's right. And they knew the Brits had something and they needed their help. For
I
example,
think.
things like the development of mines and yeah, in the world's first influence mines. And they would go to the British and say, okay, can you show us how to do that? Right. And they'd say, well, for everything, you have to give us 3 times what we give you because our stuff is so good and all. There was these kind of piss and match and little mind games going on. So the intelligence community was quite hopeless. And then again, you just have people that were put in charge of departments that could not accept the premise. There are
Right.
people right now who do not accept the premise. And the thing is, there are people in charge of divisions that don't know what they have in their own archives. It
Mhm.
gets eventually something is set up. It happened here in Canada. And nobody takes over the position seriously, right? And it becomes
Mhm.
just an archive, and then people forget the significance of it, and then it literally gets lost. Of course, and if you look at books like The Day After Roswell, his claims of what he was toying with that was in his desk drawer that he'd lend out to industry, a lot of it isn't believable, but what is there, it's like, what kind of silly game was that?
Mm.
So, like I said, it's an oxymoron, and they're not up to the task. And when they do get in and even do try to do the right thing, they're lost. And such is life.
All right. Well, I think we're pretty clear on your position on the intelligence community. I'm going to just move right along here. Um, the next on
They
the
have
list,
secrets.
we should have like a, is it a few moments later? How to tell a good UFO story from a bad one. I love that cryptic crib note.
Well, let's
What do
start
you
off.
mean by that?
Take the word UFO for the moment. How do you tell a good story from a bad story? Okay.
Well, people
Let
pay
so
attention.
Well, you know what I used to say. When people say, "How do you know that was a good story?" When you looked in and how it became a case. And I used to say, and this was kind of a flippant response I used to give, and perhaps a little meaningless, but you might get the drift of it. People say, "How do you know a good story?" I said, "Because it has a beginning and a middle and an end."
Hmm.
Okay. But
Aristotle
there is,
wanted that.
that's right. But there is a point to that. Let me give you an example where I consider a very bad story and what happens when you treat it as if it's worthy of more respect.
Ooh, I
Oak
like it. Okay.
Island. Oak
Oak
Island.
Island.
You've
Oh
heard of that?
yes, Oak Island. It's the story that's not a
Okay.
story.
Well, here's the problem. And uh, how can I put this? Here's the problem I always had, even as a boy. I can remember reading books like Blue Nosed Ghost by Helen Creighton, right? And
Oh
books about
yes,
Oak Island
classic
and all
book.
this.
Yes.
But
Hmm.
even as a young boy, I read it and I thought, there's a problem here with Oak Island. And I can remember back then, this is long before the Laguna Brothers and the current show that goes on forever and all the effort and money that's been put into this. But even back then, lives were lost and people have tried hard to come up with this treasure. But the story always started with some boys in the late 1700s finding a depression in the ground and what may have been something, wasn't it like a block and tackle hanging from a tree
Yeah.
over it? And people went, you know what I think this is? And they started speculating, right?
Hmm.
And they're still speculating and it's off and
there's,
running.
still, there's been what? How many seasons of that
Yeah.
Discovery
But
show
but
speculating?
back in the 1700s, they were already digging and assumed this was for buried treasure.
Hmm.
Nobody knew that. But here's the problem: there wasn't even a story.
No.
They just saw this and figured that's what it was, right? And
Hmm.
these centuries later, what we're doing is saying, you know what? It could be the Knights Templar. It could be the Portuguese. It could be the
Hmm.
French. It could be
Hmm.
this. It it,
Captain
it
Kidd. It
could have
could be
been
Captain
ship
Kidd's treasure.
stores. It could have been Captain Kidd. It could have been whatever. It could have been many, many things, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And they're digging and they keep finding more of this and more shafts and whatever, which is mostly the previous workings of looking
Hmm.
for whatever was probably never there or was there and gone. And you know
Hmm.
what? It may have even been treasure. I'm not trying to
Hmm.
say I certainly don't know more than they do. My point is this is the story starts with people seeing a feature on the land and saying, you know what I think this is. But there's no story leading them to that in the first place.
Hmm.
There's nothing. They find a
Hmm.
feature and they're trying to make all these stories fit it that and promises fit it, and that that's not a good story. That's not a
It's
story.
an it's a empty promise. It's a stick with a carrot
It's
that may or may
wishful
not exist.
thinking.
It's
It's
wishful
wishful
thinking.
thinking. And
They've been.
that's
I mean,
all
how
it
many
is.
people have died going down that hole
I think
over
6.
over the decades?
I believe 6.
Hmm.
Yeah. And I mean, former presidents put money into this.
Hmm.
There's been a lot of digging. I mean, I'm sure it's no small amount currently spent by Irving and the other group that's helping them. And it's entertaining to watch. I mean, and I've learned some new phrases there, like Bobby Dazzler and all this. But the
Hmm.
show is very popular. And I
Hmm.
wish them all the best. When you think about all the effort over the centuries and the time, I'd like to think that somebody did
Oh,
find something. I don't.
it would be fabulous. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't follow it. But you see what I'm saying? The problem is in the story. If it had been me and I've done that, I would have thought, I wonder what somebody was doing here. But I wouldn't have jumped from, I wonder what they're doing here to, Armady, it's
Hmm.
buried treasure,
I think
right?
it's fair to say that Oak Island has jumped the shark. Um, but what's an example of a good story, Chris?
Lanza Meadows.
Oh, okay, let's go. A lot of people
Okay.
won't know this story.
Okay.
First, you got to
Newfoundland.
just Lands O Meadows. That's Meadows. That's
Lanzo
AUX,
Meadows.
folks. Lands
AUI. It's
AUX
French.
Meadows. Yeah,
Yeah, it's on the northwestern tip of Newfoundland, just across from the
that's right.
Labrador coast of the mainland. And some people may know, and you may not know, particularly if you're down south and tend to celebrate Columbus Day. Uh, the thing is, it's believed from information that had been left over the centuries in Icelandic sagas that the Vikings at some point had come to North America, or very likely had, that they'd gone to places which they had named Vinland and Helgeland.
Hmm.
And we're not going to get into all
Hmm.
the little details in the saga. And there's a couple of key sagas, the saga of Eric the Red, and others
Hmm.
that led them here. But there were a
Hmm.
couple of researchers, Scandinavians, the Ingstats, right?
Hmm.
And they looked at this and they believed that these stories, which had long been told and were written down centuries later, might have might have some truth to them. So,
Hmm.
kind of what they decided to do, and this is a very brief simplification of it, what these researchers did is they decided that let's just treat the story as if it's true, period. And obviously we'll not emphasize or
The,
waste too much
the
time
the
with here
story
be
being
dragon.
that the story being that, and I think it's fairly accepted that pre Columbus
Yeah, this is over.
settlers
Yeah,
in northern
500.
Newfoundland.
Yes, over 500 years before, 5 full centuries,
Hmm.
Europeans made
Sean's
it to
got the
North
map up
America.
there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Now,
you can see as he zooms out here, this is a very remote, and it's close to Greenland, right?
well,
It's
that's
fairly
Iceland
close to
there.
Greenland.
Is it? Oh no, there we go. That's northern. That's Newfoundland, of course, and there's Labrador, right?
Right,
So
right,
again, we'll try to keep this brief, so I'll be just skipping through it.
right.
But the premise the researchers had, the Ingstats, the couple, right, man and wife,
Hmm. Hmm.
was
Hmm.
that maybe these stories are true.
Hmm.
Obviously we'll ignore on the map, a bit about fighting the dragon or something, or the embellishments over the centuries, because at the time they weren't written down, they were passed on orally, but were eventually written down centuries
Well,
later.
I just got to take a little exception with that because I think the whole dragon theme needs to be explored and really debated at some point. But
That's
yeah,
another
generally, yeah,
episode. So
yeah, yeah.
they looked at it like that, and they followed the descriptions in the saga basically, and they thought, okay, this name must indicate Iceland, and this must have been Greenland, and this must have
Hmm.
been Baffin Island, and whatever. And
Hmm.
they followed the directions, and at one point, the directions, when you start putting it, and actually took them to the shores of Labrador, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And at that point, there was actually specific directions that said in the longboat you had to sail south, and as you were sailing south down the coast, you would find a beach and that wasn't a sandy beach, it was nothing but rocks, and it would take 2 days to row by in a longboat. So they
Wow.
thought, well, that's about 40 miles, right? Is how they
Right.
calculated.
Hmm.
So they did just that. They went there, and when they found that beach, they went down that 40 miles, and then you head back up to sea and cross over to Newfoundland, to the rock itself, the island, right?
Hmm.
And they landed there and they walked ashore, and without a great deal of extended effort, found the remnants of the Icelandic settlement there, which was only used as a
Land,
way station for about 21 years at Lanza Meadows.
right.
The
Lands of
point
Meadows.
being, there was a well established story that promised that outcome. It had a beginning, it had a middle, and it had an end. And it was
Hmm.
either true or it wasn't. It might have been just a work of fiction and folklore and that. but it turned out to be true. Maybe had a few embellishments, but following the directions and that story, the discovery was made, and the discovery has held up to scrutiny. And, we know that at some point there'll be other discoveries. Norse artifacts
Mhm.
have been found in the high Arctic
Mhm.
and in Labrador. And we do know that they went further south because, you know, in the excavations, they found things like buried butternuts, which were never native to
Right, part
Newfoundland.
of native to northern
Yeah,
Newfoundland.
so obviously they must have went up and down the coast and traded and went much
Yeah.
farther.
Well, it kind of
But
makes sense. You go from Europe to Iceland to Greenland to Labrador, Newfoundland. I mean, that. I mean, when people are piloting, ferrying small airplanes to Europe and back, they make those hops, right? You go from Newfoundland to Greenland to Iceland to Ireland, right? Because you have the
yeah,
least amount of time over the water,
so
and
let's
it's a
get
great
into
circle route. Actually, it's a great circle route,
yes,
which is a shorter
absolutely.
distance. It's a
I
great
mean,
circle route.
they were travelers for sure. I mean, remember they went as far as Constantinople, up rivers.
Right.
Wow, they went around the world.
Amazing.
You, you can go up in Hagia Sophia, and there are still Vikings. They eventually bred out and just got absorbed in the culture there. When they went there, there is Norse graffiti carved into the woodwork there that still exists, right? That says things
In
like, "My God,
Istanbul,
this." Yes.
The
My
Hagia
God,
Sophia
this
of the
priest
mosque.
is so
Yeah,
long winded. I hate this priest when he gives a sermon.
yeah,
Stuff like that
yeah.
in
Really?
Norse.
Like
Yes,
graffiti?
it's
Oh
still
my God,
carved
that's
into the
hilarious.
woodwork by the Norse. Yeah. Anyway,
That's good.
um,
Listen, we got
let's,
we got about 8 minutes left before the music comes in.
okay. Well, let me
Have you
just tell
finished
you.
this thought? You got any last words on this one? We're going to move
Yes,
on
I
to the
do.
next
I'll
topic.
finish this off in
Okay.
just a couple sentences here.
All right.
So, this takes me to my big secret that I'm going to reveal at the end of the summer because I've been following a very good story that's been hard to prove and has eluded the work of me and others on Shelburne there for 29 years. And I've
It's
made
a
a
long time,
breakthrough,
Christopher.
and it took 29 years to get it straight. And you know what? I only kept with it because I knew this was a good story because it had a beginning and a middle and an end. And when you took
Oh,
away
I
the
know where you're getting with
dragons
this.
and the errors, and
Hmm.
that's the big thing for down the road. And you
Hmm.
know what? We're going to reveal that as far as I have at the time at the UFO Expo coming up this October in Yarmouth.
Hmm.
And I might give an exclusive on the Martin Willis show beyond this one about that. There's a teaser on that. We had one other thing you were going to bounce off me, or am I
Yeah, it's
crazy?
kind of out of the
Oh
blue.
man.
Like
Okay.
my filmmaker brain can't figure a transition, so I'll just read it. Why mankind will never go to
Oh,
Proxima Centauri without alien assistance, and then
and we
and then
should.
you have dot dot dot. Man has developed commitment issues.
Oh, has he ever? That's right. Okay.
What do you mean
So
by that?
we only got about 7 minutes left. So let me try to boil this down. We have changed as a species and as a society, and in terms of what we're capable of. We are now techno man, right? We've
And techno woman
and techno woman,
and,
right?
and non-binary techno.
We've gone to the edge of the solar system and be gone with probes,
Right.
right? We've been to the
Yeah.
moon with manned missions, all this stuff, right? We are
Hmm.
techno man. But you know what? There were things being done 500 years ago in the time of Columbus and before that we cannot do now. We will never pull off. And the reason is nowadays, if you design a project, if the payoff doesn't happen within a presidential term in the United States, if it's U.S.
Hmm.
oriented, it isn't going to
Hmm.
happen because,
Hmm.
the political wind shift, it'll go out. So, what do I
Is
mean?
that why
So,
the Hoover Dam is only the Hoover Dam and not the Hoover, whoever the next president
it's
was
why
there?
we haven't gone back to the moon in 50. It's why we haven't gone back to the moon in 50 years. It's why there hasn't been a proper US government UFO research project. There's been a couple and they've been pathetic. They've
Yes.
been hurtful. But
And
here's the other.
infiltrated with agendas, but yeah.
Yeah, all these years and we never went back to the moon, let alone onto Mars. And now it's going to take private enterprise and Elon Musk's and people like him to do it, and it will happen
Hmm.
at some point, right?
Hmm. Right.
So you got that. So what was so great about 500 years ago? I'll tell you what was so great. Things didn't change every 4 years. Government was monarchies. I'm not saying that's a preferred thing, but here's the upside of it. You could build things like Notre Dame Cathedral, and the people that designed that, the people that started working on it knew, Michael, they would never see the end.
Mhm.
They wouldn't see the payoff, but they did
Mhm.
it, right?
Mhm.
And they had huge problems along the way, engineering problems to solve. The walls collapsed by the weight of the ceiling. You had to invent the flying buttress, right?
Right.
You
Mhm.
know, the main thing took about 130, 40 years and went on for some time after that. The people that began that project knew they would not see the end, yet it happened.
Yeah.
We're struggling now to restore it from the fire, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the difference between man then and now, right? You know, a lot of people were illiterate then. You go back to, say, Britain at the time, but at the same time, if your family was a tradesperson that had a successful business, certainly if you were nobility and others, you might have gone to play and been familiar with the works of a guy called William Shakespeare and other great writers that have
Mhm.
survived 5 centuries and that have
Mhm.
something that are a useful one-way message to us, just like the inscription on the side of Voyager, right? People had that kind of commitment to
Mhm.
mankind, to others, to higher goals and ordeals. We've lost that. We have
Mhm.
absolutely lost that. We could go to Proxima Centauri, and there's reasons now to say I could get into it from the brown dwarf and way life might work there. And yes, I keep up. I know the problems, right? But there's what's different between us and now. We have the technology. We don't have the will. We don't have the government system. We that can compete with what happened five in terms of getting the thing done, right? I
Mhm.
mean, we could go on so much to the right and left of the spectrum. I mean, whether it was gun control or the reverse of it, whatever. But you can't get anything done anymore in these democracies, right?
Yeah,
They
it's true.
and I don't want to get into the politics of it, but the point is they did things back then. People willingly participated in projects, gave it their all for things would not see the personal payoff to. You
So, are
can't
what you
sell that.
is what you're saying along the lines of this is that we are spending we seem to have this fixed idea that unless we can achieve these speeds where we can have a visible payoff in a lifetime to get someplace like, say, Proxima Centauri or Zeta
Yeah,
Reticuli, that
yeah.
we just don't even consider the possibility that it could be a generational journey and we should get started right away because we have that technology.
Well, people that
Or do
yeah,
we?
yeah. Well, we could if we don't, we could have. I mean,
Mhm.
look what Elon Musk has done so far. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like he could have taken us back to where Apollo was and the things before Apollo, right?
Mhm.
But I
Mhm.
mean, he liked the way it looked in the 1940s when the rocket came back and landed where you told it to and whatever.
Yeah,
And he did that, something NASA never tried.
it's very
He
Buck Rogers.
overshoot. It's very
Very
Buck
Buck
Rogers.
Rogers.
He overshoots. And basically, he tells his engineers to make that work. And when it can't work, you crash. Well, okay, why didn't it work? Find out, fix it, design it, solve
Mhm.
it. Like the flying buttress for the collapsing roofs
Right.
from the lead roof. You know what
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean?
yeah. You're
And whatever
improvising
it
in the
took.
moment. Right? Getting the
They
job
couldn't
done.
to get up there, they didn't have sufficient scaffolding and the weights were too heavy. They filled those walls, they filled that church up with sand and then shoveled it out again.
Jesus, really?
Yeah, they did what they had to along the way to make it work, right? This is the
So they
difference.
built a
But
hill inside the church. Is that what you're saying?
they filled the hill with sand to get the heavy roofing materials up and then
That's
dug it out again.
insane. That's insane. I
Yeah.
didn't know that.
Yeah, and they used ancient Roman technology, like for to lift up just the regular mortar and bricks. They had these things men would walk in that would rotate. That was like a big block and
Right.
tackle. You could put the men in. That was
Like a
actually used in
conveyor.
Roman times. Yeah,
Wow.
but the point is that we have technology and things that are so much better. What we don't have is commitment and government systems.
Yeah.
And we now, and of course, the rest of us say, well, you know, we'll wait for the aliens to hand it to us, like they
Yeah.
did in
Right.
Contact or whatever, right?
That's a
And so
pipe
far,
dream.
the aliens have been clever because they're probably following their own prime directive or whatever. We
Can
don't
I
want to
just take
arm
this
them.
to a slight detour, but it's still in the subject. It
You can
reminds
take
me
it
of
wherever
Phil.
you like.
Thanks, buddy. It reminds me of Philip Corso with this cockamamie idea that the modern modern integrated circuit technology and fiber optics came from alien technology. What a crock of, I just don't
Yeah,
buy it.
yeah,
I mean,
it's
that's an
weird.
insult to the skills and engineering finesse of a lot of people, right?
Yeah, it's one of the things I admired, in the golden age of science fiction, that you had editors like John W. Campbell who used to, if you took to him a story and it was like, he always wanted to see that mankind could do it. We could rise to the occasion and pull it out.
Right. We didn't need help
Nowadays,
from our
we want our
alien
benevolent
overlords.
space brothers to hand us the answers. They want us to be
Sounds like
galactic wealth.
communism. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say they want us to be galactic welfare recipients,
Hmm.
from
Yeah,
benevolent
exactly.
space
Which is
brothers.
ridiculous.
I
I
don't know.
mean, look at Elon Musk, right? I mean, if anybody's proving the fact that having a little bit of a vision and the economic means and the drive to do something that may he may never actually see come to fruition, that's amazing. And I do agree with your hypothesis that
That's right.
why we
That's
may
what's
never go to
changed.
Proxima
That's
Centauri.
why we've changed as a society, and somebody with his his vision and his
Hmm.
limitations and his own mental problems has come together
Sure.
to really, kind of line up with how things used to be, how selfless. It's all about selfishness, really, and selflessness
Right. Yes.
at
It's
the
like,
national
the old
level.
adage, right? Like, blessed is the farmer who plants a crop he'll never see, right? Trees he'll never sit under, you know, for the future generations. I got you on that one. You hear the music? Ladies and gentlemen, Chris Stiles is officially spent. He made it through the show. It's fabulous. Thanks, Chris.
Uh,
That was awesome. We got through every one of the topics on your list, on your cheat sheet of what is it? These are the
Life, the
things.
universe, and everything. Um,
Yeah,
no, these are
yeah. A
just
few
some
of your favorite
personal
things.
ideas. These are minority things that have fallen out of the field that I think are too early discarded. You got to keep an open mind, like I always say, not so open your brain falls on the ground, but open to the future and to things of the past where people had it right. Know the
That's
difference
right.
between a good and bad story, pursue it with vigor and passion, right?
Right, and always integrity. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching this episode of FSUFO. You can subscribe on a little subscribe button that would be right maybe here, and click the notification button. Like us, comment. Any questions? We're going to do a question and answer show soon, so we've already got a bunch of questions lined up from viewers.
I hope
Looking
they're
forward to that,
tough.
Chris.
I
Yeah,
hope that I want
and
to
you'll
squirm.
be seeing. And also, folks, you'll be seeing Justin again. He's been busy boy, moving his domicile, but he'll be back on the show. And
Just like
it
brokering.
was, yeah. Thanks, Chris.
All right.
Have a great evening,
Pleasure,
everybody.
Michael.